The day was hot and the sun was burning bright above the little frontier town. It was the kind of afternoon when dust rose with every step, and the sound of wagon wheels echoed down the dirt street. The market had arrived. Merchants were setting up their stalls and people were gathering to see what might be bought or traded. It was a lively moment for many, but not for the frightened mare standing at the far end of the square. She was tied to a thick wooden post with a heavy chain around her neck. Her once golden coat was now covered in layers of dust, and her mane hung in tangled strands. She was weak and tired, and her ribs showed through her thin sides. Flies circled her, but she didn't have the strength to shake them away. People passed her, some stopping to look, others just walking on. To them, she was only another animal up for sale, but to her every second felt longer than the last. A group of men stood nearby, leaning against a fence, laughing and talking loudly. They were the ones who had brought her to the market. Their boots stomped in the dirt as they called out to anyone passing by. "Fine mare here. Strong as they come. Won't find another like her," one of them shouted. But even as they spoke, the truth showed in her tired body. Her legs trembled slightly and she lowered her head close to the ground. Children walked by holding their parents' hands, looking at her with curiosity. Some people whispered that she looked too old. Others said she looked like trouble. No one came close. It was easier to move on and pretend she wasn't there. A soft wind blew through the market, carrying the smell of hay, leather, and horses. Wagons creaked, coins clinked, and somewhere a man was playing a harmonica. But under that bright sun, the mare felt alone. Her ears twitched at the sound of a saddle creaking in the distance. That sound came from a man named Eli Carter. He was a quiet cowboy who lived on a small ranch just outside of town. He wasn't a rich man, but everyone who knew him said he had a good heart. He had a soft way with animals, a kind of patience that didn't need loud words or force. When he walked through the market, people often greeted him with a nod. He gave a small smile back but never talked much. Eli had come to town that day to pick up feed and a few tools. He wasn't looking for trouble, and he wasn't looking to buy anything alive. But as he walked down the row of stalls, something made him stop. It wasn't the men yelling. It wasn't the sound of chains. It was the way the mare lifted her head at just the right moment. Her eyes met his. For a second, it felt like the noise of the market faded away. Her dark eyes weren't wild or dangerous. They were tired, full of pain, but also something else. It was the look of someone who still held on to a tiny bit of hope. A kind of quiet, desperate hope. Eli didn't move. He stood there in the dust, staring at her as if the world had slowed down. The mare gave a small step forward and the chain rattled against the wooden post. One of the men nearby looked up and laughed. "Don't bother, Cowboy," he said with a grin. "She's no good. Just standing here to make the place look full. Nobody wants her." Eli didn't answer. He wasn't the kind of man to argue with people like that. Instead, he walked a little closer, careful not to frighten her. She didn't back away. Her ears moved slightly and her breathing came out in shaky little bursts. There was something about this man, the way he didn't rush, the way he didn't yell, that made her stand still. Other people passed by without paying much attention. The world kept moving, but between the cowboy and the mare, something unspoken was building. Eli saw more than a weak horse. He saw the way she tried to keep standing even when her legs wanted to give up. He saw the way she looked at him, not with anger, but with a kind of silent question. The mare took another small step. Dust lifted from the ground around her hooves. Her chain pulled tight, but she didn't turn away. She just kept her eyes on him. There was no sound, no words, but Eli felt something stir in his chest. He didn't know why, but he felt like she was asking him something without speaking. The men nearby laughed again. "You want her, Cowboy?" "She ain't worth much," one of them said, but Eli still didn't speak. His hand slowly moved to the brim of his hat and he tilted it slightly forward. That was his quiet way of showing respect. The mare's ears flicked at the motion. Someone behind Eli muttered, "That one's broken." Another said, "She won't last long." But Eli wasn't listening to them. He was only looking at her. He saw something they didn't see, a spark still buried under the dust and pain. A wagon rolled by, making the chain clink again. The mare flinched, then steadied herself. She lifted her head just enough for the sunlight to catch her coat. For a brief moment he saw what she might have looked like before, then strong, proud, free. Eli took another slow step forward. The mare didn't move away. She blinked once and her breathing slowed. It was as if she had decided something deep inside. She didn't have a voice like a human, but when she let out a soft breath through her nose, it sounded almost like a whisper. Please. Eli felt it not in his ears but in his chest. He didn't know why, but he understood it. That single moment, that quiet breath was enough. The men leaned back against the fence, not caring. The crowd shifted, still busy with its own noise. But the cowboy stood in silence, and the mare looked at him with every bit of strength she had left. Eli had seen hurt animals before. He'd brought back strays and tired creatures from rough places. But this was different. He didn't just see an animal in need. He saw someone who still believed someone might come. She didn't bow her head like she had given up. She lifted it, even just a little, because she believed there was a chance, even if it was the last one. The wind blew softly again, and the dust danced in the air. The chain rattled lightly. Eli didn't have much money, he knew it. But he also knew he couldn't just walk away. He didn't understand it fully yet. But something about this mare made him feel like walking away would be like closing a door he wasn't supposed to close. His boots sank a little deeper into the dirt as he stepped closer. She leaned forward too, as far as the chain would let her. Her eyes softened, and for the first time that day there was no fear in them. Only trust. Quiet, fragile trust. Eli stopped just a few feet from her. The men were still laughing behind him, but he didn't hear them anymore. The sun was warm, the dust was dry, and the world around him disappeared. It was just him and her. A tired horse with a gentle heart, and a cowboy who hadn't planned on saving anyone that day. He didn't speak. She didn't either. But their silence was stronger than any word that could be spoken. The mare blinked slowly, as if to say, "Please claim me." And in that moment, Eli Carter knew deep inside, this wasn't going to be just another day at the market. Something had begun between them, something neither of them had planned but both of them needed. It was quiet, it was simple, and it was real. The chain still held her, but hope had already reached her heart. And Eli, he had already decided he wasn't going to walk away. Not this time. The air in the market was warm and heavy, the kind of heat that made time feel slow. People kept walking past the wooden post, their boots kicking up small clouds of dust, their voices blending into one steady noise. But Eli barely noticed any of it. His eyes were fixed on the mare. The crowd could have disappeared, and he wouldn't have cared. Something in the way she looked at him had already changed everything. The mare stood still, the chain resting tight against her neck. Her breathing was soft and uneven, but her gaze didn't shift away from Eli. It was strange how quiet the moment felt between them, even though the marketplace was full of sound. It was as if she had chosen him, not with words, not with anything loud, but with that single, steady look. She gave the smallest step forward. The chain rattled softly like a quiet cry. Eli's chest tightened. It wasn't a sound most people would have noticed, but to him it was clear as day. She wasn't fighting. She wasn't trying to run. She was asking. One of the men selling her noticed Eli still standing there and smirked. "You look like you've seen a ghost, cowboy," he said, tilting his hat back. "She's nothing special. You want her, she's yours, and if you've got the coin." Eli didn't reply. He didn't like men like that. Men who treated living things like objects. He stepped a little closer to the mare. The man frowned but didn't move to stop him. He probably thought the cowboy would walk away soon like everyone else. The mare lowered her head slightly as Eli came near. Her ears twitched, and her tail brushed weakly against her legs. She didn't look away, not once. Her eyes were wide but not wild, tired but full of something fragile, trust, hope. The wind shifted gently, blowing a bit of her mane across her face. Eli lifted a hand slowly, carefully, like someone who had done this many times before. He didn't rush her. He let her see every small movement. She blinked once and stood still, breathing unevenly but not pulling back. His fingers brushed the air near her face, close enough for her to smell the warm scent of leather and dust. She gave a soft breath through her nose, warm and shaky. For a brief second it was like a quiet whisper between them, not in words, but something just as clear. "Please," her eyes seemed to say. "Please don't leave me here." Eli's heart felt heavy and full at the same time. He hadn't planned to spend any money that day. He'd only come to town for feed. But this was different. The man with the hat crossed his arms. "She's weak," he said, almost laughing. "But a horse is a horse. You want her, it'll cost you a bit." Eli finally turned to look at him. His face was calm like it always was, but inside, something was burning slowly. "How much?" he asked. The man raised an eyebrow, surprised that Eli was even interested. He gave a number, more than the mare was worth in her condition. But Eli didn't flinch. He wasn't thinking about the cost in coins. He was thinking about that look in her eyes. "She won't last long," another man chuckled, leaning on the fence. "You're wasting your money." But Eli ignored them all. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the small amount of bills and coins he'd brought with him that day. It wasn't much. He'd planned to use it for something else entirely, but now it didn't matter. He held it out to the man with the hat. The man counted it lazily, shrugged and said, "Fine, she's yours. We were going to get rid of her anyway." The way he said it made Eli's chest tighten again, but he didn't say a word. He only walked forward and gently laid his hand on the mare's dusty neck. She flinched for a heartbeat, old fear, old pain, but then she relaxed. Her breathing slowed, and her head leaned slightly toward him as if she already understood she was no longer alone. Eli's hand was warm and steady. He had a way of touching animals like they were precious, not fragile. The mare lifted her head and gave a deep breath, the kind that comes when a wall inside starts to fall. The man at the fence bent down, unlocked the chain from the post and tossed it aside carelessly. It clanked on the ground. The sound made the mare flinch again, but Eli whispered softly, almost like speaking to a friend, "Easy now. You're safe." The moment the chain fell away, the mare didn't bolt. She could have tried to run. She could have pushed past the crowd and disappeared, but instead she stepped closer to Eli, pressing her warm muzzle gently against his chest. It was a small movement, soft, shaky, unsure, but it said everything. She trusted him. People around started to notice the scene. Some whispered to each other. A woman selling apples smiled faintly. A boy tugged his father's sleeve and said, "She likes him, Pa." Others just shook their heads, thinking Eli was wasting his time. But Eli didn't care what they thought. His eyes softened as he looked down at her. She had been standing here for hours, maybe days, feeling forgotten. And now she was pressing her head against someone who saw her. That was all that mattered. Eli gently took the rope, the same one that had been tied too tightly, and loosened it carefully. He didn't tug. He didn't force. He simply held it in a way that said, "You can trust me," and she did. Her legs were still shaking, but she didn't resist. The sun caught her coat just right as she lifted her head a little higher. Beneath the dust there was a soft golden shine. It was faint, but it was there. A few people nearby saw it too. "She might clean up real nice," someone muttered quietly. Eli didn't answer. He just smiled a little, the quiet kind of smile that said more than words could. The mare gave a small snort, and the dust around her hooves danced up in the air. Her steps were slow, almost unsure, but she followed him as he turned to leave the market. Every few steps she tilted her head as if making sure he was still there. Behind them the men laughed again, but their voices sounded far away now. The moment the chain fell, the world changed for her. The market that had felt like a cage no longer held her. Eli led her gently through the crowd. People moved aside as they passed. Some looked curious. Some didn't care. But the mare walked with her head a little higher, still weak but no longer alone. She wasn't being pulled. She was following. Eli didn't speak much, but he whispered soft words to her as they walked. Just enough for her to know she was safe. "You're all right now," he said quietly. "No one's going to hurt you. You're coming home with me." The mare's ears twitched as if she understood every word. Her eyes softened. By the time they reached the edge of town, the noise of the market had faded. The sun was still warm, but the air felt lighter. Eli stopped for a moment, turned to face her, and laid his hand gently against her forehead. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. That was when he realized something simple but powerful. She wasn't just asking for help. She had chosen him. Out of the hundreds of faces passing by, she had looked at him and whispered her silent plea. And now, standing in the sunlight, he had answered. Eli tied the rope loosely to his saddle, climbed onto his horse, and began leading her slowly down the dirt road toward his ranch. The mare walked behind him, each step a little steadier than the one before. She was still tired, still weak, but the weight of fear was slowly lifting off her shoulders. The road stretched long ahead, lined with fences and wildflowers swaying in the breeze. The mare's ears moved toward the sound of birds singing. She breathed in the air, no longer thick with the smell of the market. It was the smell of open land, of grass, of something new. Eli glanced back at her and she met his eyes once more. There it was again, that quiet understanding between them. No loud promises. No big speeches. Just trust. He had spent his money. He had taken a risk, but as the wind moved through the tall grass, Eli knew in his heart he had done the right thing. She was no longer just a nameless, forgotten horse tied to a post. She was free, and for the first time in a long time, she walked not as property, not as something chained, but as someone who finally had a chance to live. Eli whispered once more under his breath, "You're safe now." The mare's ears flicked at his voice and she gave a soft breath, the same quiet whisper that had started it all. It was her way of saying thank you. It was her way of saying I trust you, and so they walked on, leaving the noise of the marketplace behind them forever. The road to Eli's ranch stretched wide and quiet under the golden afternoon sun. The sound of wagon wheels had long faded behind them. Now there was only the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the gentle rustle of wind moving through tall grass. The mare walked behind Eli's horse, her steps slow at first, but each one a little more certain than the last. Her body was still weak, but her eyes held something they hadn't before: hope. Eli rode ahead, glancing back often. She followed closely, though the rope was loose. He didn't have to pull. She wanted to follow. It was strange and beautiful how trust could begin in silence like this. Her ears turned toward every sound: the chirping of crickets, the distant bark of a dog, the creak of Eli's saddle. She had been in loud, crowded places for too long. The open road felt different. It felt like breathing again. When they reached the edge of the ranch, the mare stopped for a moment and looked around. It wasn't a grand place, but it was warm and quiet. A simple wooden fence surrounded the fields. A small barn stood on the far side with its door slightly open. The sun made the golden grass shimmer like it was welcoming her home. Eli got off his horse slowly, not making any sudden moves. He didn't rush to tie her or force her anywhere. Instead, he stood in front of her and let her take everything in. She sniffed the air, ears twitching. The smell here was different. Fresh hay, clean water, soft earth. "You're safe now," Eli said softly, more to himself than to her. He walked toward the barn, and she followed without needing a tug. Inside, the barn smelled of old wood and straw. There were a few stalls, most empty except for a gentle old mare named Daisy who lifted her head and gave a soft whinny. Daisy had lived with Eli for years. She was calm, kind, and had a way of welcoming newcomers without needing to do much. The chained mare stopped just inside the doorway, unsure. She hadn't been in a place like this in a long time. Her hooves shifted nervously on the ground. Eli didn't push. He walked ahead slowly, letting her choose to follow. Daisy walked to the edge of her stall and gave a quiet snort, as if saying hello. The new mare tilted her head, sniffed the air again, then took one brave step forward. Eli opened the stall next to Daisy's. The fresh hay inside was clean and soft, and a small bucket of water glistened in the corner. He let the mare walk in on her own. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then slowly stepped inside. When he gently closed the gate, it didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a soft sigh of relief. She drank water carefully, like someone who hadn't trusted water for a long time. Her thin sides moved with every breath, and she closed her eyes for a moment. Eli stood outside the stall, watching silently. He didn't need to say anything. That night, Eli stayed close to the barn. He gave her space, but didn't leave her alone. He made sure there was enough hay, checked the rope, and sat quietly on a small wooden stool outside the stall. The crickets sang softly outside. A warm lantern glowed near the door. The mare looked at him several times before finally laying down on the hay. She curled her legs under her body and rested her head close to the ground. For the first time in who knew how long, she felt safe enough to close her eyes. In the following days, Eli made it his quiet mission to help her heal. He never forced her to do anything. In the early mornings, when the sun painted the sky soft orange, he'd come to the barn and sit by the gate with a brush in his hand. At first, she didn't let him touch her. She would back away, breathing fast. But Eli never got angry. He waited. Every day he came a little closer. One morning, she let him brush the side of her neck. His hands were rough from work, but gentle in the way they moved. Dust lifted from her coat, revealing the faint shine of her natural golden color. She leaned into the brush without meaning to. That was the moment something began to change. Eli named her Whisper, after the way she had called to him without words. "You've got a gentle soul," he said softly as he brushed her. You just need a little time. Whisper began to watch him as he worked around the ranch. When he carried hay or fixed the fence, she followed him with her eyes. Daisy often stayed near her stall too, as if reminding her she wasn't alone. At night, Eli sometimes heard Whisper breathing softly in the barn, no longer shaking with fear. One afternoon, Eli decided to lead her out of the stall for the first time. He didn't put a hard bit in her mouth or a heavy saddle on her back. He simply looped a soft rope gently around her neck and led her toward the pasture. The sun was warm and the grass outside smelled sweet. Whisper hesitated at the door, but Eli didn't pull. He simply waited. After a few breaths, she took a small step forward. The soft earth felt different from the hard ground she had known before. She lowered her head and sniffed the grass. Then she took another step. Eli walked slowly, matching her pace, never rushing. For days, this became their routine. A little more walking each morning. A little more trust each evening. He would talk to her in a calm, steady voice, even if she didn't understand the words. She understood the kindness in them. Neighbors began to notice the change too. When Eli had first brought her home, some people in town said she wouldn't make it. But now her coat was beginning to shine again. She still carried old scars in her heart, but her eyes no longer looked empty. They were bright and curious. One day, a young boy from the neighboring farm came by with his father to borrow a tool. He peeked into the pasture and whispered, "Is that the same horse from the market?" His father nodded, surprised. Whisper was standing in the sunlight, her head high, tail swishing gently. She still had the same body, the same bones, but her spirit had begun to return. Eli spent many quiet evenings sitting by the fence, watching her graze. He didn't think of himself as a hero. He just believed kindness could fix what cruelty tried to break. There were moments when Whisper would freeze at sudden sounds. A wagon rolling too close, a shout from down the road, the crack of a branch. Old fears don't disappear overnight. But every time she flinched, Eli was there. His voice was steady. His presence was sure. Slowly, those moments became shorter. Slowly, she began to trust the world again. One soft evening, as the sun dipped low, Eli sat on the ground near the fence. Whisper walked toward him, stopping just a few feet away. Usually, he was the one who came to her. But this time, she came to him. Her ears twitched, and she lowered her head to nuzzle his hat gently. Eli smiled quietly, not moving fast, not trying to grab her. "That's it, girl," he said softly. "You're getting your spirit back." She breathed out slowly, warm air brushing his hand. It wasn't just a horse being tamed. It was trust being rebuilt, one quiet moment at a time. As the days turned into weeks, Whisper's body grew stronger. Her coat shined like gold under the sun, and her steps became surer. She ran in the pasture with Daisy sometimes, kicking up dust, moving with a joy that had once been buried deep. The first time she did, Eli leaned on the fence, watching with a soft, proud smile. But it wasn't just about strength. It was about the bond between them. She began to follow him without a rope, waiting for him at the gate when she heard his boots on the dirt. She trusted him completely now, not because he forced her to, but because he gave her time. Whisper's journey wasn't over. She still had memories that made her tense, shadows from the past that whispered back sometimes. But now, when she looked at Eli, she didn't see a stranger. She saw someone who had chosen to stand with her, and Eli, who had gone to the market that day for something simple, had found something he didn't know he needed, a reason to care a little deeper, to love a little more quietly. The night sky above the ranch glimmered with stars, and Whisper stood in the pasture with her head lifted toward the breeze. She was no longer the tired, chained mare from the market. She was free. She was strong, and she had someone who saw her worth even when no one else did. It was trust that brought her here. A trust that grew not from words, but from gentle steps, warm hands, and a heart that refused to walk away. The morning sky was soft and golden when Whisper woke up to the sound of birds singing around the ranch. Dew sparkled on the grass like tiny stars scattered across the ground. She had been living with Eli for several weeks now, and every day she felt a little stronger, a little braver. Her coat, once dull and dusty, now shimmered in the sunlight. Her legs were still thin but steady, and her eyes were no longer filled with fear. Eli walked out of the house with his hat tilted low, a cup of warm coffee in his hand. His boots made a soft crunch on the gravel path. Whisper lifted her head as soon as she heard him. She recognized the sound of his steps now. She knew his voice, the way he moved. the calm that came with his presence. "Morning, girl," Eli said softly. He leaned on the fence and watched her for a while. She was grazing peacefully, her tail swishing gently. It made him smile to see how much she had changed. When he first brought her home, she had been too weak to even stand for long. Now she walked with her head high. Eli had planned something special for her that day. It wasn't about breaking her or turning her into a workhorse. It was about giving her a chance to run again. A real run. Not because she was forced to, but because she wanted to. He opened the pasture gate slowly, leaving it wide open. The fields beyond stretched out far, the grass tall and wild. It was the kind of land horses loved. Open, free, endless. Whisper lifted her head when she saw the gate. She blinked slowly, her ears twitching. It was as if she was remembering what freedom felt like. Eli didn't stand in front of her to block the way. He simply stepped aside, keeping his hands down and his voice quiet. "Go on," he whispered. "You're free to run now." For a long moment, Whisper didn't move. She just stood there, looking at the open field. The wind brushed against her golden coat. Somewhere far in the distance, a bird called. Eli didn't rush her. He just waited. Then something changed in her eyes. It was like a small flame had been lit inside. She took one step forward, then another. The soft earth under her hooves was cool and damp from the morning dew. Her muscles tensed gently as if testing their strength. And then, with a soft snort, she broke into a run. It wasn't a wild, frightened run like the ones she must have known in her old life. This was different. This was free. Her mane flew behind her like a ribbon as she galloped through the field. The sound of her hooves was steady and strong, the rhythm of a heart that had finally found its beat again. Eli leaned against the fence, watching with quiet pride. He didn't cheer or whistle. He didn't need to. This moment belonged to her. Whisper ran like she had been waiting for it her whole life. She kicked up clumps of earth as she moved faster, her legs stretching with strength she never knew she still had. Daisy, the old mare, neighed from her stall as if cheering her on. Whisper turned her head slightly toward the sound, then galloped even harder, wind rushing past her face. She had no chain, no heavy rope, no harsh hand pulling her back. It was just the earth beneath her and the sky above. She slowed down near the far end of the field, lifting her head high. Her chest rose and fell with deep breaths, but she didn't feel weak like she used to. She felt alive. Strong. The kind of strong that comes not from fighting, but from healing. She pawed the ground lightly, then turned her head back toward Eli. He was still standing there, hands resting on the fence, the same calm expression on his face. When their eyes met across the field, it was as if time slowed down. He didn't say anything, but she understood. She wasn't just a rescued horse anymore. She was family. Eli walked slowly toward her, not wanting to break the magic of the moment. She stayed still, waiting. As he reached her, she lowered her head slightly, letting him rest his hand against her warm neck. Her breathing was strong, steady. He could feel the power beneath her skin, the life she had fought quietly to get back. "You did good, girl," Eli whispered. "Real good." She gave a soft breath warm against his arm. She leaned her head gently into his chest the way she did on that first day at the market. But this time it wasn't a desperate plea. It was trust. Pure, quiet trust. The days that followed were some of the best she had ever known. Every morning Eli opened the gate for her. She would run through the field, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, always free. In the evenings, she would stand near the fence waiting for him to return from the town or the barn. She knew his routine and he knew hers. The bond between them grew in those small moments. Whisper would nuzzle his arm gently when he brought her water. She would follow him around the ranch even when she didn't have to. Eli often found himself talking to her like she was a person, telling her about his day, about the things that needed fixing, about the weather. She didn't answer, of course, but she listened with those deep, understanding eyes. One afternoon, a group of riders passed near the ranch. They slowed down to watch her run. Whisper moved like a river flowing through the field, graceful and steady. One of the men whistled softly and said, "That's a fine horse. Didn't think she'd ever look like that again." Eli gave a quiet smile but didn't say anything. He didn't need their praise. He knew what she had overcome to reach this moment. Whisper began to trust other things too. She wasn't afraid of the brush anymore. She didn't flinch at sudden sounds like she used to. When Eli walked behind her or touched her side, she stayed calm. It wasn't just healing of the body. It was healing of the heart. There were evenings when Eli sat outside under the stars and Whisper would walk up behind him, resting her head gently on his shoulder. The first time she did it, he didn't move for a long while. He just sat there feeling the weight of her trust. "Guess we saved each other," he said softly. The seasons began to shift slowly. The days were cooler, the sky a little softer. Whisper had gained weight and strength. Her golden coat shined so bright that people in town sometimes stopped to look when Eli rode her down the road. But Eli didn't ride her hard or fast. He treated her with the same quiet respect he always had. She was never just an animal to him. She was his partner. One afternoon, a storm rolled in quickly from the west. The wind picked up and dark clouds gathered over the horizon. Eli rushed out to the pasture to bring Whisper into the barn before the rain began. But when he opened the gate, he saw something that made him pause. She wasn't afraid of the thunder like before. Instead of backing away or trembling, Whisper stood tall in the wind, her mane flying wildly around her face. She looked powerful, strong, and unbroken. Eli called softly, and she came to him right away, steady and calm. They walked together into the barn just as the rain began to pour. Eli dried her off gently with an old blanket. She closed her eyes as his hands moved over her coat. The storm raged outside, but inside the barn it was warm and quiet. Whisper stood with her head pressed lightly against his shoulder. That moment reminded Eli of how far she had come. From a broken soul standing in chains to a shining spirit standing beside him without fear. When the storm ended, the sky opened into a quiet evening. The air smelled fresh and the grass shimmered with raindrops. Whisper stepped outside and gave a soft, joyful neigh. She pawed the ground and then ran across the field with a playful energy Eli hadn't seen before. It was as if the storm had washed away the last shadows of her past. Eli leaned against the fence, hat low, watching her. She had been someone's afterthought once. Just a chained, tired mare at a dusty market. But now she was proof that kindness could turn a broken beginning into a beautiful story. As the sun dipped behind the hills and the sky burned orange and gold, Whisper ran with her head high, tail flowing behind her like a banner of light. And Eli knew deep inside, this wasn't just about saving her. This was about letting her be who she was always meant to be, not chained, not forgotten, but free. The air around the ranch felt softer in the early mornings now. The season was changing, the sun rising slower and lower, wrapping everything in warm golden light. Whisper stood in the pasture, her coat shining as the breeze brushed gently against her mane. She looked nothing like the tired, broken horse Eli had first seen at the market. Her legs were strong, her head lifted high, and her spirit glowed quietly like the dawn itself. Eli stepped out of the house, his boots crunching on the ground, and she lifted her head as soon as she heard him. It had become their little morning ritual. He'd come out with his hat tilted low and she'd look up to greet him. She trusted the sound of his steps now. She knew he would always be there. "Morning, Whisper," Eli said softly. His voice carried across the quiet field like a familiar song. She let out a warm breath and took a few slow steps toward the fence. She didn't rush. She didn't have to. She knew he wasn't going anywhere. Eli leaned against the wooden fence and watched her for a long moment. He could still remember the day he had seen her at the market, chained, tired, with a silent plea in her eyes. Now she was a different being entirely. She wasn't just healed on the outside. She was whole again on the inside, too, and watching her gave him a kind of peace he hadn't felt in years. As the sun climbed higher, Eli saddled his old mare Daisy for a short ride into town. Whisper stood near the fence watching with quiet curiosity. A few weeks ago she would have stayed back, nervous, but now she walked right up to Eli, resting her soft muzzle gently against his shoulder. He laughed quietly and rubbed her neck. "You want to come along, don't you?" he murmured. She gave a soft snort as if answering him. Eli hadn't ridden Whisper since he brought her home. He didn't want to push her too fast. But now, seeing how calm she was, he knew she was ready. Not because he wanted her to be, but because she wanted to be. He placed a light saddle on her back, moving slowly so she could feel every step of the process. She didn't flinch. She stood still, trusting his touch completely. The first time she had seen a saddle here, she had been tense. But this time was different. Eli tightened the straps gently, then patted her side. "Easy, girl," he whispered. "We're just going for a little ride." The moment he climbed onto her back, Whisper stood tall and steady. No fear, no trembling. Just trust, Eli gave a soft click of his tongue, and she took her first steps toward the open road. Her hooves pressed into the dirt with quiet confidence. Daisy followed behind them, slow and easy like a loyal friend. The road stretched out wide ahead. The grass on either side of the path swayed gently, and the wind carried the smell of wildflowers. Whisper's ears flicked at every sound, but not with fear, with curiosity. She was discovering the world in a new way, no longer through the lens of pain, but through calm and trust. They passed the small wooden bridge where the creek flowed gently beneath. Whisper paused for a moment, sniffing the air. The water reflected the sunlight like a mirror. She had once been afraid of new places, but Eli's hand on her neck was steady, warm, and reassuring. She crossed the bridge without hesitation. In town, people turned their heads when they saw them arrive. Some of them still remembered the day Eli had led that tired, chained mare out of the market. She had looked like she wouldn't survive another week back then. Now they saw a golden horse with bright eyes and a proud step. "Is that the same mare?" a woman near the bakery asked softly. "Yes," an older man replied, watching her closely. "Eli's horse, the one he saved." Whisper walked through the street calmly. No panic, no pulling back. She stayed close to Eli's steady hand. He bought feed, greeted a few neighbors, and walked her past the stalls where they used to laugh at her. This time no one laughed. People only stared in quiet surprise. One of the men who had sold her in the first place happened to be in town. He froze for a second when he saw her. She didn't look like the same horse anymore. He lowered his hat slightly, not meeting Eli's eyes. Eli didn't say anything to him. He didn't have to. Whisper's strength spoke louder than any words could. On the way home, Eli gave her the reins and let her walk at her own pace. She moved slowly but gracefully, her head lifted toward the wind. It wasn't a race. It was a quiet victory. Back at the ranch, Eli unsaddled her and let her loose in the pasture. Whisper shook her mane, stretched her legs, and then began to run. Not in fear, not because anyone told her to, but because she loved it. She ran across the field with the wind chasing her, her tail flowing like a golden ribbon. Eli stood at the fence, hands in his pockets, a smile spreading slowly across his face. Watching her run was like watching a story being rewritten, not erased but rebuilt into something stronger and brighter. As the days passed, Whisper became more than just his horse. She became a part of his life. She followed him to the barn, waited for him by the fence when he returned from town, and gently nudged his arm whenever she wanted attention. She had once been silent and scared, but now she carried a quiet strength that could be felt without words. Sometimes Eli would ride her out to the hills at sunset. The sky would turn soft pink and orange, and the wind would cool down as the day ended. He'd stop at the top of a hill, take off his hat, and just breathe. Whisper would stand beside him, her ears twitching gently. The view stretched wide and far, green fields, soft clouds, and distant hills fading into the horizon. He often thought about how everything changed the day he saw her at the market. It had felt like an ordinary day at first, just another afternoon, but one look from her had changed the path of both their lives. She had asked for help without speaking, and he had listened without needing words. Whisper had healed, but so had Eli. Before she came, his ranch had felt quiet, too quiet. Life had fallen into the same routine. He did his chores, went to town, came back, slept. But after Whisper arrived, everything seemed to have a little more meaning. Caring for her gave him a sense of purpose he didn't know he needed. One quiet evening, the sky above the ranch filled with stars. Eli sat on the fence watching Whisper graze peacefully. The air was cool, and the crickets were singing their nightly song. Whisper walked up slowly, her hooves soft on the grass, and rested her head on his shoulder. Eli chuckled softly, patting her gently. "You've come a long way, girl," he said quietly. "A long way." She gave a soft breath, warm against his arm, the same kind of quiet whisper she had given him the day they met. Only now it wasn't a cry for help. It was a whisper of trust, of gratitude. The ranch felt alive now, not just with the sound of horses and wind, but with something deeper. Connection. Eli knew there would still be hard days ahead. Life always had its storms. But Whisper had proven something to both of them. Even the most broken can find strength again when they're given a chance. Months later, people in town often pointed to Eli and Whisper when they spoke about kindness. "That cowboy saved her," they'd say. But Eli always shook his head gently. No, he'd answer softly. She saved me too, because she did. Whisper had reminded him that even quiet acts of compassion can change lives. She had taught him that trust isn't built with force or loud words, but with patience, warmth, and time. One golden afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the field glowed like honey, Whisper galloped freely across the land. She wasn't the frightened mare in chains anymore. She was a symbol of what could happen when someone refuses to turn away. Eli watched her run, his hat tilted low, his heart full. She had come into his life as a silent plea. Now she ran like the wind, strong and free. And long after the sun set and the stars rose, their bond remained, not just between a man and a horse, but between two souls who found strength in each other. It wasn't just a rescue story. It was a story of healing, quiet love, and the kind of trust that never needs words. She had whispered once, "Please claim me." And Eli had answered without saying anything at all. From that day on, they belonged to each other, not in chains, not in ownership, but in trust. Whisper was home, and so was Eli.